The night Maris Caldwell finally stopped saving her husband began with the sound of a champagne glass breaking somewhere behind the velvet curtain of the grand ballroom, a thin, glittering crack of sound that vanished almost instantly beneath polite laughter, violin music, and the soft swell of people pretending not to hear anything that might spoil an expensive evening. The ballroom of the old hotel in downtown Asheville had been dressed to look as if money itself had learned restraint. Crystal chandeliers poured warm light over white tablecloths, silverware lined up in obedient rows, placecards written in dark green ink, floral arrangements of ivory roses and mountain laurel rising from the center of every table like small disciplined gardens. Outside the high arched windows, the Blue Ridge night pressed black and cold against the glass. But inside, everything glowed with the kind of controlled elegance that made people lower their voices and stand straighter. Maris stood near the left side of the stage in a black dress she had bought 3 years earlier for a client gala, and had worn so many times to Brennan's events, that the fabric had begun to feel less like clothing than uniform. One hand held a small clutch so tightly that the edge pressed a red crescent into her palm. The other rested against her thigh, still, composed, empty. She had learned long ago that when things were collapsing behind the scenes, the first rule was not to let the body confess before the mouth decided what story it would tell. Across the room, Brennan Caldwell stood beside Kellen Royce, his regional director, laughing with his head slightly tipped back, one hand resting loosely in his pocket, the picture of a man comfortable under admiration. He wore a navy suit that Maris had picked up from the dry cleaner that morning, because Brennan had forgotten it was still there, a white shirt she had steamed while answering vendor calls, and the silver cuff links Helena Caldwell had given him after his first big promotion. He looked handsome in the way he always looked handsome at public events. Not too polished, not too hungry, warm enough to be trusted, tired enough to seem hard-working. People liked Brennan quickly, they always had. He remembered names, or seemed to. He laughed at the right places. He leaned in when people spoke, creating the impression that their words mattered more than the rest of the room. Men described him as sharp but approachable. Women described him as charming but safe. Older clients said he had integrity. Younger sales reps said he was the kind of person who made success look human. Maris had once believed all of that because she had helped make it true enough to survive inspection. Her phone was in the clutch, still warm from the email she had read 12 minutes earlier in the women's restroom, while 2 donors reapplied lipstick beside her and talked about silent auction baskets. The email was from Dorian Price, Brennan's colleague, a man Maris barely knew beyond firm handshakes and awkward holiday party conversations. The subject line had been blunt enough to make her stomach drop before she opened it. Original files, Brennan contract issue. Inside were attachments. The first version of the proposal Brennan had claimed Dorian approved. The metadata showing Brennan altered the internal memo after the client signed. The email chain where Brennan promised service terms the company had never authorized. And 2 text screenshots in which Brennan wrote, "Do not make this heavier than it has to be," and "Maris can help me frame it if it comes up." Maris had stood under the restroom light, staring at that last sentence until the edges of the phone blurred. Maris can help me frame it. Not Maris will understand. Not Maris deserves the truth. Not I have to tell my wife what I did. Just that old assumption dressed in new language. If the story became dangerous, she would step in and make it survivable for him. Now Kellen was walking toward the podium, and the violin music softened into a graceful hush. Brennan turned slightly, searching the room until his eyes found Maris. When he saw her looking back, he smiled. It was not a large smile, not a desperate one. It was the small private smile he had used for years in public rooms when a situation required her to move without being asked. It meant, stay calm. It meant, you know what to do. It meant, be the version of my wife people trust. It meant, if something breaks, catch it before anyone sees. For years that smile had pulled Maris forward like a hook under the ribs. She had crossed hotel kitchens, hospital corridors, family living rooms, bank offices, and conference halls because of that smile. She had lied gently, rearranged facts, softened failures, absorbed blame, translated Brennan's carelessness into stress, illness, miscommunication, system error, bad timing, anything except what it was. But that night, with the email sitting like a live coal inside her clutch and Brennan smiling from beneath the chandelier light, as if her loyalty had no expiration date, Maris did not move. She did not nod, she did not smile back. She stood where she was and felt, with a coldness that surprised her by not feeling dramatic at all, the end of a job she had never agreed to take. Years before that ballroom, Before the email chains and the whiskey breath and the bank calls and the quiet humiliations, Maris had built a life around preventing disaster. She did it professionally first, and she was good enough at it that people began to mistake her competence for calm. At Blue Ridge Gatherings, the event company where she worked as operations manager, Maris was the person people called when the caterer sent chicken instead of salmon, when the florist delivered lilies to a bride allergic to lilies, when the city permit had the wrong street closure time, when a donor's name was misspelled on a plaque minutes before the dedication ceremony. She knew which rental company kept backup chairs in a warehouse off Sweeten Creek Road, which bartender could be bribed into staying an extra hour without complaining, which photographers lied about traffic, which bridesmaids fainted when they had not eaten, which wealthy men became unreasonable when microphones failed. Her tote bag carried safety pins, stain remover, ibuprofen, allergy tablets, double-sided tape, a portable charger, breath mints, a tiny sewing kit, bandages, and a folded list of emergency numbers she updated more often than some people updated their wills. Amara Whitlock, the owner of the company, once said Maris had the rare gift of making panic feel scheduled. Clients loved her because they never saw the problem until after it had already been solved. Vendors feared disappointing her because she did not yell. She simply looked at them with clear gray eyes and asked what they were going to do next, and that was worse. At first, Maris had been proud of this. There was dignity in being useful, there was power in stepping into chaos and making something hold. She liked the moment after a crisis passed, when the room settled back into beauty, when guests kept laughing, when a bride walked down the aisle never knowing the musicians had almost left because the check was missing, when the donor shook hands beside a banner Maris had personally driven across town to reprint. She told herself she was not someone who needed credit. Credit was for amateurs. Professionals protected the outcome. But over time, the world teaches certain women a dangerous lesson. If they can carry too much without dropping it, people stop asking whether it should have been theirs to carry. Maris did not notice when her talent for repair became an expectation. She did not notice when expectation became identity. By the time she met Brennan Caldwell, she was already fluent in the language he would later use to keep her close. They met at a medical technology networking event that Blue Ridge Gatherings had organized for Brennan's company, a mid-size regional distributor trying to look more sophisticated than it was. The event took place in a restored brick venue with exposed beams and terrible backstage wiring. 30 minutes before guests arrived, Maris discovered that half the name tags had printed with outdated titles. She was standing at a folding table in the service corridor, peeling labels and rewriting names by hand in dark ink, when Brennan appeared with 2 cups of coffee. She remembered looking up and expecting him to ask whether the CEO's table could be moved or why the sponsor logo was too small, because men in suits rarely entered service corridors unless they wanted something. Instead, he set 1 coffee beside her elbow and said, "You do the kind of work people only notice if it goes wrong. That has to be exhausting." Maris paused. The sentence landed in a place most people walked past. She had been complimented before, usually with cheerful phrases like lifesaver or miracle worker, or I do not know how you do it. Brennan's words were different. They did not praise the rescue. They noticed the cost. She liked him before she meant to. He was not the most handsome man in the room, but he had a face that became more attractive when he listened. Dark hair, quick eyes, a mouth that could turn self-deprecating at exactly the right time. During the reception he found her twice, once to tell her the corrected name tags looked better than the originals, once to ask whether she ever got to eat at the events she ran. When she laughed and said usually standing beside an ice machine, he looked genuinely offended on her behalf and smuggled her a plate from the buffet. Later, after the guests left and the cleaning crew began dragging tables across the floor, he stayed behind under the excuse of waiting for a rideshare that took far too long to arrive. They talked beside a stack of folded linens while the room lost its glamour 1 piece at a time. Brennan told her about sales quotas, about being the oldest son in a family where charm was expected to become success, about Helena's faith in him, about a father who had died too early and left Brennan feeling as if every room expected him to become impressive before he was ready. He spoke beautifully about pressure. That was one of the first things Maris loved. He knew how to describe the feeling of being watched, the fear of falling short, the private shame of not being as steady as people thought. He made vulnerability sound like intimacy, and Maris, who spent her life making broken things look unbroken, mistook his confession for courage. In the weeks that followed, he kept showing up where she did not expect him. At a charity breakfast, he found her in the kitchen cutting replacement place cards, because the printer had jammed. And instead of teasing her for being too serious, he held the stack steady and asked which names needed correcting. At a hospital donor dinner, he noticed she had not eaten and left a plate wrapped in foil on a side table with a handwritten note. For the woman making everyone else look graceful. He remembered her coffee order after hearing it once. He called when he said he would call. He asked about vendors by name. When she complained about a florist who had delivered wilted hydrangeas, he listened with the same attention he gave senior clients. Maris had dated men who liked the shiny version of her, the composed woman in black dresses who could silence a room with a clipboard. Brennan seemed to like the tired version too, the woman sitting on a loading dock at midnight with sore feet and mascara smudged beneath one eye. That mattered. It mattered so much that when the first unevenness appeared, she filed it under human flaw instead of warning. Brennan was late sometimes, but he apologized beautifully. He forgot small commitments, but he looked ashamed. He told stories in which pressure pressed down on him from every direction, and because Maris knew pressure, she translated his failures through empathy before she translated them through evidence. The more she learned about his childhood, the more she softened. Helena had raised Brennan to be impressive, and grief had polished that expectation into something sacred after his father died. Brennan became the son who could not disappoint. Jonas, his younger brother, became the quiet one who watched from the edge of family photographs. Brennan learned early that people loved him most when he seemed overwhelmed by the burden of being loved. Maris did not know that yet. She only saw a man who looked at her work and noticed the cost. She did not understand that a person can notice your cost and still decide to spend you. The first time she covered for him, it felt almost romantic. They had been dating 6 months, long enough for toothbrushes to appear in each other's bathrooms, not long enough for resentment to have a place to sit. Maris had a wedding the next morning at a mountain lodge, the kind of event that required weather contingencies, shuttle timing, and a florist with a history of creative lateness. She was already in bed with her laptop open beside her, reviewing final notes when Brennan called close to midnight. His voice was different, stripped of charm, thin with panic. He had forgotten to send a revised packet to a prospective hospital client, and the deadline had passed 2 hours earlier. The packet contained corrected equipment specs, updated pricing, and a letter from his manager. If the client noticed, it would make him look careless in front of Kellen. "I know this is not your problem," he said, which was exactly the kind of sentence that made Maris feel noble for making it her problem. "I just do not know how to fix it without making it worse." She went to his apartment in sweatpants and a rain jacket, hair twisted up with a clip, and found him barefoot in the kitchen with papers spread across the table like evidence from a crime scene. He looked devastated, not in the theatrical way some men perform panic, but in the collapsed way of someone who had already imagined the punishment. Maris sat down, opened his laptop, and began asking clean operational questions. What had been sent, what had not, who had access, whether the email server had delayed attachments before. By 2:30 in the morning, she had helped him reconstruct a plausible timeline in which the revised packet appeared to have been held in the outgoing server queue because of a file size issue. She rewrote the message so it sounded apologetic but not guilty. She made him send it before dawn. The next day, after the wedding ceremony, she ran on 3 hours of sleep. Brennan texted that the client accepted the explanation and Kellen had praised his quick recovery. That night he came to her apartment with Thai food and flowers from a grocery store, wrapped his arms around her waist while she stood at the sink and said into her hair, "You saved me. I honestly do not know what I would do without you." Maris closed her eyes. She heard love. She did not yet hear the job description. Marriage turned the rescues from exceptional to ordinary. Brennan's mistakes did not explode. They accumulated, each small enough to be survivable, each emotional enough to make refusing help feel cruel. In the second year, he forgot to transfer money into the account they used for the mortgage because he had been traveling and assumed autopay would pull from the backup account. The bank called. Maris handled the late fee, transferred funds, and spent 40 minutes on hold while Brennan texted from a sales conference saying he was mortified. In the third year, he drank too much at Jonas's birthday dinner and knocked over a tray of glasses while telling a story too loudly in Helena's living room. Maris drove him home, then told Helena the next morning that Brennan had reacted badly to a new acid reflux medication. Brennan hugged her in the pantry later and whispered that he hated himself for embarrassing her. In the fourth year, he promised Helena he would repair her porch railing before winter. forgot for 6 weeks, then panicked when she mentioned inviting neighbors for Thanksgiving. Maris quietly hired a handyman, paid the rush fee, and told Helena it was Brennan's surprise because he knew she hated asking twice. Helena cried and said Maris was a blessing. Brennan looked at Maris over his mother's shoulder with wet eyes full of gratitude. That look became a currency. He spent it often. She accepted it because she had not yet understood how little it cost him. There was always an apology. That was what confused the wound. Brennan did not deny his mistakes in private. He was tender there, sometimes painfully so. He would come behind Maris while she was folding laundry or loading the dishwasher, put his chin on her shoulder, and say he knew he had messed up, knew she carried too much, knew he needed to do better. He would call himself an idiot before she could call him irresponsible. He would take her hand with both of his and say, "I know you deserve more than this." Sometimes he cried, and Maris, who had no defense against a man ashamed in private, would soften. She told herself accountability looked different for different people. Brennan hated public embarrassment. He had grown up under Helena's polished expectations, under a family mythology that made him the promising one, the charming one, the son who would rise. Maybe he needed time to become brave. Maybe her job as his wife was not to expose every failing but to stand close while he learned to stand. That was the story she told herself because the alternative was humiliating. The alternative was that he was not learning because she had made learning unnecessary. By the 5th year, the marriage had become a machine so smooth that Maris could barely hear it running. Brennan made mistakes. Maris absorbed the first impact. Brennan came home wounded by his own weakness. Maris comforted him. Brennan loved her intensely for a night or two. Life resumed. If she ever hesitated, he did not accuse her outright. He did something more effective. He became small, his shoulders rounded, his voice lowered. He said, "I thought you were the one person I did not have to perform for." That sentence always found the softest part of her. It made her feel that asking him to face consequences was just another stage on which he would be forced to stand alone. So she stepped in again. She turned his forgotten birthday gift into a shipping delay. She smoothed over a rude comment he made to Jonas by saying he was exhausted. She wrote apology emails he sent under his own name. She made phone calls in a pleasant voice that concealed the fact that her teeth were clenched. And every time she saved him, he loved her with a relief so convincing, she confused it with devotion. Vera Quinn saw the pattern before Maris could afford to. Vera owned a small bakery in West Asheville where everything smelled of butter, cinnamon, coffee, and the kind of warmth people were willing to buy by the slice. She had known Maris since their 20s, back when Maris still wore cheap heels to client meetings and carried extra flats in her car. Vera was soft-bodied, sharp-eyed, and almost impossible to impress. She had watched Maris cancel dinners, arrive late, leave in the middle of movies, and answer Brennan's calls with the specific alertness of an emergency dispatcher. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Maris stopped by the bakery after a vendor meeting and found Vera icing a carrot cake behind the counter. Brennan had called twice during the drive. Maris ignored the first call and answered the second. He needed her to look at an email before he sent it to Kellen because he was worried the tone sounded defensive. Maris said she would call him back in 10 minutes. Vera set down the spatula and looked at her. "Does he ever have a crisis on a day when it does not cost you something?" Vera asked. Maris laughed too quickly. "It is just a stressful quarter." Vera wiped frosting from her thumb with a towel. "It has been a stressful quarter for 7 years. Maris said Vera's name in the warning tone people use when they are not ready for the truth to keep walking toward them. Vera did not stop. Helping someone is not the problem. But when a person starts scheduling their collapse around your availability, that is not an accident anymore. Maris felt the familiar need to defend him rise hot in her chest. He is not calculating like that. Vera's answer was quieter than Maris expected, maybe not consciously. Maris looked toward the front window where rain blurred the street into watercolor streaks. "You do not see the way he is afterward. He feels awful." Vera's face softened, but her voice did not. Feeling awful after someone else pays your bill is not the same as paying it. Maris left angry, with a box of pastries she had not meant to buy, and Vera's words lodged under her skin like a splinter too small to pull out. That night Brennan apologized for needing her help with the email, brought her a mug of tea, and rubbed her feet while they watched television. The tenderness soothed the splinter but did not remove it. In the weeks that followed, she began noticing something she wished she had not. Brennan's remorse always came after the rescue was complete. He fell apart only when there was no longer anything at risk except his self-image. He asked for comfort after Maris had done the uncomfortable work. Brennan also praised her in public, and that praise became another kind of trap. He called her the engine of my life at dinner parties. He posted a photo of them at a vineyard outside Asheville with the caption, "My anchor, my compass, my calm in every storm." Friends commented with hearts and admiration. Helena shared the post and wrote, "Our family is lucky to have this woman." At first, Maris felt warmed by it. Who would not want to be seen as indispensable by the person they loved? But over time, the compliments began to harden around her. If she was his anchor, what was she allowed to do when he kept throwing himself into storms? If she was his calm, what happened to her own fear? If everyone admired her for keeping him steady, would anyone still admire her if she stepped away and let him fall? Brennan did not have to demand silence. He surrounded her with gratitude so thick it became difficult to breathe through. Helena loved to tell relatives that Maris knew how to keep a home's dignity. At family dinners, she would pat Maris's hand and say, "Some women make things worse by needing everyone to know every little problem. You have grace." Maris smiled because the alternative was to say that Grace felt a lot like being handed a broom and praised for never putting it down. The praise followed her into rooms where Brennan had already failed. At Helena's house, Maris learned to watch the older woman's eyes whenever Brennan disappointed her. Helena never looked at Brennan first. She looked at Maris, as if Maris were the appointed interpreter of her son's better intentions. When Brennan forgot a family lunch, Helena called Maris and said, "I suppose he got buried again," in a tone that made it Maris's job to confirm the gentlest explanation. When Brennan snapped at Jonas over a political argument and later vanished onto the porch, Helena found Maris in the kitchen and said, "You know he carries things heavily," as though heaviness were a license to drop whatever he carried onto someone else's feet. Brennan's family did not dislike Maris. That was part of the horror. They adored her for the exact quality that was consuming her. They called her steady. They called her elegant. They called her the best thing that had ever happened to Brennan. No one asked whether being the best thing had begun to feel like being the floor beneath him. Even at work, Maris's reputation worked against her. Amara trusted her with impossible events because Maris always delivered. Vendors expected her late-night replies. Clients requested her specifically because she anticipated problems before they admitted them. Her professional life and marriage began to mirror each other in ways she did not want to see. People loved the result of her exhaustion and called it excellence. Brennan loved the result of her sacrifice and called it marriage. The first time Brennan's chaos damaged Maris's work, he managed to make it feel like her choice. He called at 1:06 in the morning, and Maris knew before answering that something had gone wrong, because Brennan never called that late unless panic had outrun pride. She was in bed with an event schedule open on her tablet, finalizing a corporate retreat breakfast menu. Brennan had sent a quote to a major client with pricing nearly 18% lower than the approved rate because he had copied numbers from an old spreadsheet, and then, trying to fix it quickly, had forwarded a version that made it look as if the lower pricing had been internally approved. "If this gets to Kellen, I am finished," he said. "Not fired maybe, but finished. I will be the guy nobody trusts with numbers." His breathing was uneven. "I know it is late. I know you have work. I just need another brain. Another brain." It sounded almost respectful. She sat at the kitchen table until dawn, laptop open, coffee growing bitter beside her, helping him build a cleaner explanation. She advised him not to lie outright, because outright lies were brittle, but to emphasize version confusion, attachment naming, and rapid correction. Brennan typed while she dictated. He kept saying, "I am sorry, and you are incredible, and I swear this is the last time." At 5:42 he sent the email. At 7:15, Maris showered with her eyes burning and went to work. By 10:30, she had forgotten to confirm a last-minute menu change for a corporate lunch. The client had requested vegan substitutions for 6 executives. The kitchen prepared the old menu. The mistake reached Amara before Maris could intercept it. Amara did not shout. She did not need to. She called Maris into the small conference room, closed the glass door, and placed the printed event sheet on the table. "You initialed the update but did not send it to catering," she said. Maris stood with her hands folded because her body knew workplace accountability even when her mind was fogged with exhaustion. "I know, I missed the final send." Amara's eyes stayed on her. "That is not like you," Maris nodded. "I understand," Amara leaned back. "No, I need more than that." This client was embarrassed in front of their executives. "We looked careless. You looked careless, and by extension so did I." The word careless hit harder than Maris expected. Careless was the one thing she had built a life around not being. She had been too careful. That was the absurdity. She had spent the night carefully protecting Brennan from his own carelessness, then walked into her own workplace and became the careless one. When she told Brennan that evening, he looked stricken for the first minute. Then relief that his own problem had passed seemed to pull him subtly away from the consequences of hers. He put his hands on her shoulders and said, "I am so sorry, but Maris, you did not have to stay up with me the whole time." She looked at him. At first she thought she had misheard. "What?" Brennan softened his voice. "I mean, I appreciate it. God, you know I do, but you could have gone to sleep. I would have understood." Maris stared at his face, searching for the place where the sentence had gone wrong before it reached his mouth. "You called me at 1 in the morning and said you were finished if we did not fix it." He looked down. "I was panicking," she answered. "Yes." He lifted both hands slightly, already beginning to separate himself from the wreckage. "I am not blaming you. I just do not want you to feel like my thing caused your thing, her thing, his thing." Separate boxes, neatly labeled only after she had finished carrying both. Something opened in Maris then, not fully, but enough for cold air to enter. "You do not get to accept the rescue and refuse the weight of the rope," she said. Brennan looked wounded. "That is not fair." It was the first time she noticed how quickly fairness appeared once she stopped absorbing the unfairness quietly. The second wound came in front of people. 2 days later, Amara gathered the operations team and 2 representatives from the sponsoring company to review what had gone wrong with the menu. Brennan happened to be present because his medical device firm had a minor sponsorship role in the upcoming Wellness Expo Blue Ridge Gatherings was coordinating. He stood at the back of the room in a gray blazer, arms folded, looking professionally concerned. Maris gave a concise explanation of the process failure. She did not mention Brennan. She would not drag her marriage into a work meeting, she knew that. Still, when Amara said, "I need to understand why you were not functioning at your usual level," Maris's eyes flicked to Brennan for 1 second. 1 second was all she allowed herself. She did not need him to confess everything. She did not need him to humiliate himself. She needed 1 sentence that acknowledged reality without exposing all of it. "There was a personal emergency. She had been helping me. This was not simple negligence. Anything that would put a hand, however small, between her and the word careless." Brennan looked down at his phone. The motion was so slight no one else noticed. Maris noticed. Her body noticed before her thoughts did. Amara continued speaking. Brennan remained silent. The meeting ended. In the hallway afterward, Maris stood near the break room, listening to the machine spit burnt coffee into a paper cup for someone else. Brennan approached with a careful face. "I did not know what to say in there," he said. Maris turned slowly. "You knew what happened." He kept his voice low. "I could not bring up a private issue in front of your boss and a sponsor." Maris's eyes did not leave him. "You did not have to bring up private details. You could have said I was dealing with an emergency." Brennan's mouth tightened. That would have invited questions. She looked at him for a long second. "So instead you let them believe I was careless." His face arranged itself into concern. "Maris, I was trying not to make things more complicated for you." The lie was so clean it almost shone. "No," she said. "You were trying not to make things complicated for you." He looked hurt, and for the first time his hurt did not move her toward him. It stayed where it belonged, on his face, not in her hands. That night she lay awake beside him and listened to his breathing, steady and deep once he finally slept. She thought of Amara's face. She thought of Brennan's eyes lowering to his phone. She thought of the sentence, "I did not know what to say." It was such a small sentence, so ordinary, so plausible. Yet beneath it lay the whole architecture of the marriage. Brennan always knew what to say when Maris could protect him. He knew how to sound regretful, how to sound afraid, how to sound grateful. He knew how to say, "I need you. You saved me. I hate that I put you through this." But when protecting her required even the smallest risk to himself, language abandoned him. Or perhaps it did not abandon him. Perhaps it obeyed imperfectly. Silence was also a choice. The next morning he brought coffee to her bedside, kissed her forehead, and said he was sorry the week had been so hard. Maris accepted the mug. She did not throw it. She did not cry. She simply felt the cold air inside her widen. Jonas Caldwell opened the next door. Brennan's younger brother had always been quieter than Brennan. Less dazzling, a high school history teacher with ink stains on his fingers and a way of watching family gatherings, as if taking notes for a trial no one else knew was happening. After the meeting incident, Jonas asked Maris to meet him for coffee. She almost refused because Caldwell family conversations usually ended with Maris feeling subtly enlisted. But Jonas sounded uneasy, not strategic, so she went. They sat outside a cafe beneath an awning while spring rain tapped the metal edge above them. Jonas turned a paper cup between his hands. I saw your face at Mom's last dinner, he said, when Brennan joked about you being his crisis manager. Maris stiffened. He says things. Jonas looked toward the street. He means them more than people think. She waited. Jonas inhaled slowly. When we were kids, Brennan broke Mr. Lyle's front window with a baseball. I was holding the bat when Mom came outside because Brennan had handed it to me after the glass broke. He cried first. Not fake, exactly. He was scared. But he cried first, and Mom believed I must have done it because Brennan looked too upset to lie. Maris said nothing. That happened a lot. Not always windows, homework, borrowed money, curfew. He was never the worst kid in the room. He was just the one who knew how to look the most sorry before consequences landed. Maris looked at him. You think he knows he is doing it? Jonas took a long moment. I think he learned young that shame could be used like a shield if he held it up fast enough. He finally looked at her fully. I am not telling you because I hate him. I love him. But our family has been helping him escape impact for so long that impact probably feels like cruelty to him now. Maris thought of Brennan in the hallway, saying he had not known what to say. She thought of Helena calling her graceful. She thought of herself, year after year, stepping forward because Brennan looked ashamed enough to deserve rescue. Jonas's voice softened. You are not the first person to protect him. You might be the best at it. That sentence hurt more than an accusation would have. It removed the romance. It placed Maris in a line of people who had mistaken Brennan's collapse for evidence of goodness. Not long after, Maris began collecting evidence without admitting she was collecting it. At first, she only saved things because she wanted to stop feeling unreasonable. A screenshot of the late-night call log, the email she had drafted for Brennan after the first quote mistake, a bank notice showing the mortgage transfer he had missed, a photo of his sports coat stained with red wine after the company dinner, where she told everyone he had food poisoning instead of saying he had been drunk, a copy of the check she wrote to the handyman for Helena's porch, the apology text Brennan sent after leaving her alone to explain his absence at his mother's house, the old proposal packet, the new quote chain. She put everything in a plain cardboard box in the back of the bedroom closet, beneath winter scarves and a humidifier they no longer used. The box was not a weapon yet. It was a mirror she could visit when Brennan's tenderness made her doubt what she had lived. Sometimes she would pull it out when he was traveling, sit cross-legged on the bedroom floor, and spread the papers around herself. Each item alone looked too small to justify the weight in her chest. Together, they became a map. The map showed not a man making mistakes, but a system. Brennan erred, Brennan panicked, Maris fixed. Brennan thanked her privately. Public reality remained clean. The cost moved quietly into Maris's body, her work, her time, her reputation, her sleep. Then the cycle reset. No wonder he never changed. Change would have been inefficient. The system worked perfectly for him. What frightened Maris most was not that Brennan was evil. He was not in the way simple stories prefer. He could be kind. He remembered what kind of tea she liked when she had cramps. He scraped ice off her windshield in winter. He once drove across town to bring a forgotten stuffed rabbit to a child at one of Maris's charity events, because he saw the mother crying in the parking lot. There were real good things in him, and that made the truth more suffocating. If he had been cruel all the way through, she could have left with a cleaner rage. Instead, she had to face the more complicated horror. Brennan's goodness lived comfortably beside his willingness to let others pay for his weakness. His tenderness did not prevent his exploitation. Sometimes it enabled it. After bad days, he would fold himself around Maris in bed, whispering apologies into the back of her neck, and she would lie there awake, feeling the warmth of his body and the chill of the cardboard box in the closet. The box became a second room inside the house, one Brennan never entered. It held the version of reality that did not depend on his tears. It held dates, receipts, screenshots, proof that Maris was not becoming hard for no reason, proof that love had not been enough to protect her from being used. The largest mistake came dressed as opportunity. Brennan was competing for a regional director role under Kellen Royce, a promotion that would bring more money, more travel, more prestige, and, as Brennan kept saying, a chance to finally prove that all the pressure had meant something. He was preparing a major presentation built around a contract with a hospital network purchasing diagnostic equipment. The deal looked impressive. Brennan had been praised for closing it quickly. Kellen had begun mentioning his name in rooms that mattered. Then Dorian Price discovered the service terms Brennan had promised to secure the client were not approved by corporate. Worse, Brennan had altered an internal memo after the fact to make it appear Dorian had reviewed that section before submission. Brennan came home that night with a face Maris knew too well, pale, controlled, already rehearsing fear. He placed his laptop on the kitchen table while she stirred soup on the stove. "I need you to stay calm while I explain something," he said. Maris turned off the burner. The click sounded loud. He told the story in pieces, and each piece came wrapped in context. The client had been wavering. Kellen had been pressuring him. Dorian was supposed to review the terms. The email thread was confusing. Brennan admitted he had made a judgment call, then a documentation mistake, then a correction that looks worse than it was. Maris listened, feeling the old machinery inside her begin to move, the part of her that identified the weak point, the part that knew which words would sound credible, the part that could build a bridge over a hole without asking why Brennan had dug it. He opened the laptop. "I need to know how this reads to someone outside the team." Maris looked at the screen, then at his hands. They were shaking slightly. Years earlier, that would have been enough. She would have sat down. This time she remained standing. "If I had done this," she said, "what would you do for me?" Brennan blinked. "What?" she repeated, slower. "If I altered a file at work to cover a mistake and someone found out, what would you do?" He stared at her as if she had chosen that moment to speak in a foreign language. "Maris, this is not hypothetical. I am in real trouble." She nodded. "I know. That is why I am asking." His mouth tightened. "I would support you." "How?" "I would be there." "Where?" He rubbed both hands over his face. "Why are you doing this right now?" Maris's voice stayed low. "Because every time you are in trouble, right now becomes the only time that matters. I want to know whether my trouble would ever become urgent to you." His face shifted from panic to hurt, then to irritation hidden under hurt. "You are turning this into a test when I need my wife." Maris looked at him and said, "I have been your wife. I am asking if you have ever been my husband in the same way." Brennan's eyes hardened with wounded disbelief. "That is cruel." "No," she said. "It is overdue." He closed the laptop halfway, then opened it again. A gesture of a man caught between needing help and resenting the terms. "One mistake should not destroy my life," Maris said quietly. "One mistake?" His voice dropped. "Do not do that." "Do what?" "Turn my worst moments into a case file." In the bedroom closet, the cardboard box waited like a second heartbeat. Helena arrived 2 days later with a casserole, which was how Caldwell women declared both concern and jurisdiction. She wore a cream sweater, pearl earrings, and the careful expression of someone prepared to forgive a version of events she had not fully heard. Brennan had told her enough to activate her loyalty, not enough to risk her judgment. Maris knew this because Helena hugged Brennan first, longer than usual, then turned to Maris with damp eyes and said, "You must both be exhausted." They sat in the living room while the casserole cooled on the counter. Brennan went upstairs to take a call, leaving the women in a silence so polished it reflected generations. Helena held her teacup with both hands. "Brennan told me work has become complicated," she said. Maris answered, "That is one word." Helena's mouth tightened. "He has always carried pressure heavily. He also hands it to other people." Helena looked at her with a flicker of surprise, as if Maris had spoken out of turn in a room where she had always been praised for knowing when not to. "He is not perfect." Maris said no. Helena softened her voice, and somehow that made it more controlling. "But he is good, and good men sometimes make foolish choices when they feel cornered." Maris watched steam curl from the cup. "Who cornered him?" Helena set the cup down. "That is not what I mean." Maris looked at her. "I know what you mean." Helena's voice lowered. "Marriage is not about exposing every failing to daylight. Sometimes a wife protects the house." Maris looked at her for a long second. The house or the lie? For the first time, Helena's softness thinned. There are ways to handle things without destroying a man. There are also ways to love a man without becoming the place he hides the bodies. Helena stood slowly, offended not by the metaphor's severity, but by its accuracy. "You have been a wonderful wife to him. Everyone sees that. Do not let anger make you forget who you are." There it was again, the cage built from praise. Wonderful wife, graceful woman, blessing, anchor, calm. Maris had been decorated into obedience. When Helena left, Brennan came downstairs and saw the untouched casserole. "What did you say to my mother?" Maris looked at him. The truth for once. He recoiled as if truth were a mess she had spilled on his clean floor. Dorian Price contacted Maris in a parking lot after a vendor showcase where Brennan's company had a booth. He looked worse than she remembered, thinner, sleepless, his tie loose and his eyes ringed with gray. He waited beside her car with both hands in his coat pockets, visibly uncomfortable. "I should not be doing this," he said. Maris answered, "Then why are you?" Dorian looked toward the building, then back at her. "Because Brennan is preparing to let me take the fall." Maris did not answer. Dorian took a folder from inside his coat. He told Kellen I handled that section. I did not. I questioned it. He told me he would fix it. Then the metadata shows he changed the memo after our exchange. He swallowed. I stayed quiet because I thought it would get cleaned up. I thought maybe I had missed something. Then he texted me to not make it heavier than it had to be. Maris took the folder, feeling the weight of paper that had traveled through fear before reaching her. Dorian looked ashamed. I am not a hero here. I kept quiet because I wanted my job. Maris said. Most people do. Dorian's face tightened. Brennan knows that. He knows exactly how much shame people can carry before they speak. The sentence settled between them in the cold air. At home, Maris opened the folder at the kitchen table. Brennan was not there. The house was quiet. She read every email, every timestamp, every revised file name. She saw Brennan's pattern outside the marriage, stripped of affection. At work, he did not say, I do not know what I would do without you. He said Dorian handled that section. Same structure. Different victim. The realization did not make her feel less special. It made her feel more used. The second time Brennan failed to protect her, there was no room left for misunderstanding. Stress had begun eating into Maris's work in ways she could no longer hide with extra hours. She slept poorly, woke with her jaw aching, forgot meals, answered emails at stoplights, and began checking the closet box after arguments the way some people check locks. During the week before Brennan's fundraiser, she missed a vendor payment deadline for an audio company supplying equipment for a corporate awards dinner. The vendor threatened to pull service. Amara called her into the office, and this time Brennan was present because his firm was tied to the sponsorship. Amara asked, Has something personal been affecting your work, Maris? Because I am trying to understand how 2 preventable errors happened in 1 quarter. Maris sat very still. She was not asking Brennan to confess the contract issue. She was not asking him to expose himself. But he knew. He knew she had been fielding his panic, his mother Dorian's emails, his late-night strategy spirals. He knew because he had caused them. Amara turned to Brennan with professional courtesy. You and Maris know each other outside these events. Have you noticed anything that might help me understand the pressure she is under? Brennan folded his hands on the table. His face became serious, respectful, clean. I do not want to interfere with Maris's professional situation. It was the perfect sentence. Ethical, boundaried, cowardly. Maris looked at him. He did not look away this time. That was worse. His gaze held hers with a plea in it, not for forgiveness, but for cooperation. Please understand why I cannot help you. Please do not make me pay for your damage. Please continue being the kind of woman who absorbs what I cannot afford to touch. Afterward, in the stairwell, she said, You did it again. He loosened his tie. I could not speak for you in front of your boss. You speak for me every time it protects you. Brennan sighed. That is not fair. Maris looked at him with exhaustion so old it no longer needed volume. You keep using that word like a locked door. His voice sharpened slightly. I am trying to survive something huge right now. So am I. He looked genuinely confused for half a second, as if her survival had never occurred to him as a separate event. That half second finished something in her. Maris went to Vera's bakery after closing, and sat in the back kitchen while Vera cleaned flour from the stainless steel table. The bakery after hours was one of the few places in Asheville that felt honest to her. Without customers, it was not cozy. It was work. Cooling racks, sticky floors, sugar dust, industrial sinks, tired feet. Maris told Vera everything, not every detail but enough to quote. Dorian, Helena, Amara's meeting. Brennan's silence, the way he cried at night and froze in daylight. The way she still felt cruel for not saving him. Vera listened without interrupting. When Maris finished, the hum of the refrigerator filled the room. I keep thinking, Maris said, staring at her hands. What if this is the one time he really needs me most? What if I am abandoning him in the middle of the fire? Vera put down the towel. You are not abandoning him in the fire, she said. You are just refusing to keep setting yourself on fire so he can stand there clean. Maris closed her eyes. The sentence did not comfort her, it named her. Naming can hurt more than confusion. He says we are a team, Maris whispered. Vera answered, a team does not mean one person spills gasoline and the other person becomes water. Maris said, he is scared. Vera said, I believe that. He could lose everything, he might. I do not know if I can watch that happen. Vera came around the table and sat across from her. Then do not watch as punishment. Watch as reality. There is a difference, Maris cried then, not loudly, not beautifully. She bent forward with one hand over her mouth because part of her still wanted to make grief tidy. Vera did not hug her right away. She let Maris cry without turning the crying into a task. The following days became a slow suffocation. Brennan moved through the house like a man waiting for a diagnosis, alternating between pleading tenderness and brittle accusation. In the mornings he stood in the kitchen in dress pants and an undershirt, coffee untouched, asking whether Maris had slept. At lunch, he texted articles about workplace pressure and shame. In the evenings he cried in short, exhausted bursts, then became angry when her comfort did not arrive quickly enough. "I feel like you are watching me drown," he said one night. Maris was sitting at the dining table with Dorian's file open in front of her. "I am watching you refuse the ladder unless I climb down and carry you." He stared at her. "Listen to yourself." "I am," she said. "That is new." He paced the kitchen, one hand pressed against the back of his neck. "You are treating me like I am some kind of monster." "No, I am treating you like a man responsible for what he did. You know me, I do, that is why this is so hard." He came to the table then, lowered himself into the chair across from her and let his face break open. "I am scared, Maris." She looked at him, and her heart still responded. It angered her that it responded. Love was not a switch, it was a root system tangled around bones. "I know," she said. He reached for her hand, and after a moment she let him hold it. His fingers were cold. "Please do not make me face this alone." The old sentence in a new coat. Maris stared at their joined hands, at his thumb moving over her knuckles. The same gesture he had used after she lied to Helena, after she fixed the mortgage issue, after she wrote his apology emails. "Brennan," she asked softly, "when have you faced it with me?" He lifted his head. "What? Every time I helped you, I faced it for you. I stood between you and the thing coming. But when I was in that meeting with Amara, you stood behind the thing coming and watched it hit me." He pulled his hand back as if burned. "I told you, I did not know what to say," Maris nodded. "And now I finally believe you. You do not know how to say anything that costs you." The fundraiser came the next evening. Brennan had not slept, neither had Maris. In the bedroom before they left, he sat on the edge of the bed in his undershirt and dress pants, elbows on knees, face in his hands. His tuxedo jacket lay across the chair. Maris stood by the dresser fastening earrings with fingers that felt detached from her body. "I am scared," he said. She looked at him in the mirror. "I know." He lifted his head. "No, Maris, I am really scared." His voice broke. "Kellen is going to introduce me tonight. My mother will be there. Clients, regional people. If this comes out wrong, I do not know what happens." She turned. "Have you told Kellen?" He looked up sharply. "Not yet." "Have you apologized to Dorian?" "It is not the right time." "Have you corrected the file?" "That is complicated." She looked at him for a long moment. "Have you done anything that does not require me to stand beside you and make you look stable?" His face crumpled. Tears filled his eyes, and she saw the old Brennan, the one who looked young when ashamed. "Why are you being like this?" Maris's voice stayed almost gentle, which made it worse. "Because I am trying to find the part of your fear that is about what you did to other people." He stood. "That is unfair. Everything I am doing is about everyone. No, everything you are afraid of losing belongs to you. Your job, your mother's pride, Kellen's respect, my opinion, your future. Where is Dorian in that fear? Where am I?" Brennan came toward her and took her hands. His palms were damp. "I need you with me tonight." She looked at their joined hands. "Do you need me there because you love me or because people trust you more when I am standing beside you?" His eyes flickered. "Why would those be different?" Maris gently pulled her hands free. In the ballroom, the evening unfolded with unbearable beauty. Donors bid on mountain spa weekends and private chef dinners. Helena sat near the front in a deep blue dress, glowing with maternal pride. Jonas sat beside her, quiet, watching Maris with a sadness that told her he knew something irreversible was approaching. Dorian stood near the back, pale, pretending to study the program. Kellen Royce moved through the crowd with executive warmth, shaking hands, collecting loyalty. Brennan worked the room flawlessly. He touched elbows, remembered spouses' names, laughed modestly when people congratulated him in advance. Every few minutes his eyes found Maris, and each time she felt the old rope tug between them. She did not pull back, she simply did not move forward. When Kellen stepped onto the stage, the room settled. "Trust," he began, "is not built in moments when everything is easy. It is built when no one is watching, when the choice to be responsible costs something." Maris almost closed her eyes. Brennan had helped write that line. She recognized the rhythm from the draft on their kitchen table. Kellen continued, praising Brennan's leadership, his client relationships, his integrity under pressure. People clapped. Helena dabbed at her eyes. Brennan stepped onto the stage with practiced humility. One hand briefly over his heart, he looked down at Maris, and there it was again, the smile, smaller now, strained at the edges. "Fix this, hold this, be my witness, be my clean shirt, my corrected email, my late payment, my excuse, my grace." Brennan began speaking. "Trust is not a word I take lightly. In this business, as in family, responsibility means standing up when things become difficult." Stood. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Her chair made almost no sound against the carpet. A few people at nearby tables glanced up, assuming she needed to step out. She walked not to the stage, not to the microphone, but to Kellen's table. Her clutch opened with a small click. She removed a sealed envelope and placed it on the white tablecloth beside his wineglass. Kellen looked at it, then at her. Maris? Her voice was calm enough to frighten even herself. Those are the original emails from the hospital contract. The metadata from the altered memo, the incorrect quote history, and the messages Brennan sent asking me to help frame the issue. The nearest table went silent first. Silence spread strangely, not like an explosion but like cold water under a door. On stage, Brennan stopped mid-sentence. His mouth remained slightly open around the word responsibility. Kellen's face changed as he touched the envelope. What is this? Maris looked at Brennan then, not with hatred. Hatred would have been warmer. It is the first time, she said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, that I am not fixing the story for him. No one moved. The violinist, confused, lowered her bow. Helena whispered Brennan's name, but he did not look at his mother. He looked only at Maris, and for one naked second, without her between him and the room, Brennan Caldwell looked exactly like what he was. A man who had lived too long believing remorse could arrive before consequence and still be considered courage. Then sound returned in fragments. A cough from the back table. A chair leg scraping. Someone whispering. What did she say? Kellen opened the envelope and scanned the first page, his face turning from confusion to disbelief to something colder than anger, because it had already begun calculating institutional damage. Brennan stepped away from the podium. Kellen, this is not the right setting, he said. And even then, even with the room tilting, Maris heard the instinct. Not this is not true, not I need to explain, but not here. Kellen looked up. Is this accurate? Brennan's lips parted. The ballroom held its breath. Helena stood halfway, one hand at her chest. Jonas closed his eyes. Dorian looked at the floor. Brennan turned toward Maris as if the answer might still come from her, as if even now she might throw him a word, a rope, a softening phrase. Maris stood beside Kellen's table, her hand empty after releasing the envelope, and did nothing. Brennan had to speak into his own silence. It is more complicated than that, he said. And there, in the wreckage of chandeliers and white roses and public honor, the whole marriage seemed to answer him at once. It had always been more complicated when truth reached him, and simple only when Maris paid. The aftermath did not feel like justice. It felt like broken plumbing behind a beautiful wall. Brennan was suspended pending internal review. Dorian was called in. Kellen was furious, not only because Brennan had lied, but because the company had nearly built a public honor around the lie. Helena called Maris the next morning, voice shaking with tears and rage. You could have handled this privately. Maris stood in her kitchen, looking at the pan Brennan had left soaking overnight. I did handle things privately. For years. Helena's breath trembled. You humiliated him. No, I stopped protecting him from humiliation he created. He is your husband. Maris closed her eyes briefly. I know. Then how could you stand there and let everyone see him that way? Maris looked toward the bedroom closet where the cardboard box still sat. Because I finally understood that everyone seeing him clearly was not the same as destroying him. Helena cried harder. You have changed, Maris said. Yes, I have. Jonas called later and said their mother had not spoken to him since he told her, quietly but firmly, that the family had been hiding Brennan inside other people's forgiveness for too long. She said I was betraying blood, Jonas said. Maris asked, What did you say? Jonas answered, I said blood is not supposed to be a mop. Maris laughed once unexpectedly, then cried because laughter felt like a betrayal of the ruin around her. Amara Whitlock asked Maris into her office 3 days after the fundraiser. Maris expected reprimand, perhaps dismissal. Instead, Amara closed the door, removed her glasses and said, I owe you an apology for not asking better questions. Maris shook her head. My mistakes at work were still mine. Amara did not let her escape into self-punishment that easily. Yes, and exhaustion has context. She studied Maris. I am giving you 2 weeks unpaid leave if you want it. Not as punishment, as space. When you return, we will discuss workload and boundaries, because I will not have my best operations manager confuse being indispensable with being healthy. Maris looked down at her lap. Praise had become dangerous to her, even good praise, especially good praise. I do not know how to stop stepping in, she admitted. Amara's expression softened only slightly. Then start by learning which fires are yours. At home, Brennan moved through humiliation in stages: rage, pleading, self-pity, tenderness, accusation, collapse. The first night after the fundraiser, he slammed nothing, because Brennan did not slam. He placed things too carefully. His keys on the counter, his phone face down, his jacket over the chair. controlled gestures, each one announcing the violence he would never be crude enough to perform. "How could you do that to me?" he asked. Maris stood by the sink. "I did not do it to you." His laugh was short and disbelieving. "You handed my director an envelope during my speech. I stopped preventing what you did from reaching you. You chose the most public possible way. You chose a public honor built on a private lie." He pressed his fingers to his eyes. "You wanted to punish me." "No, if I wanted to punish you, I would have told them everything." That silenced him, she continued quietly. "I did not tell them about the mortgage, or your mother's porch, or Jonas's birthday, or the quote I helped you rewrite 6 years ago, or the nights I stayed awake while you learned nothing because I made sure nothing touched you." Brennan's face twisted. "I loved you," Maris said. "I know. Do not say that like it was nothing." Her voice shook for the first time. "I am not. That is what makes it worse." He stepped toward her. "Then why wasn't it enough for you to come to me? I came to you for years. You mistook coming to you for cleaning up after you." His eyes filled. "I do not know who I am without you." There it was, the sentence that once would have undone her. Maris looked at him with such tired sadness that even he seemed to feel the room change. "That used to make me feel loved," she said. "Now it just sounds like you never thought I was allowed to be anyone except the place you went when you did not want to face yourself." Brennan cried then. Real tears, real fear, real grief. Maris did not doubt any of it. She had learned that pain could be real, and still not be accountability. A man could be devastated by the collapse of the shelter he had exploited, without fully understanding the person who had been holding up its roof. In the following week, Brennan tried every door he knew. One evening he cooked dinner, burning the chicken because he kept leaving the pan to check his phone for messages from Kellen. Another evening he brought home flowers and stood in the doorway with them like a boy holding an apology note. He wrote a long letter in which he admitted he had leaned on her too much, then asked her not to let one terrible public moment define their marriage. Maris read the letter and saw how he still placed the exposure, not the years before it, at the center of the wound. He told her he had scheduled a therapy appointment. She asked if he had told the therapist the truth or the version with better lighting. He stared at her as if she had slapped him. "You are cruel now," he said. Maris almost answered, "No, I am accurate now." But she did not have the strength. Accuracy was exhausting too. So was silence. So was breathing in a house where every room contained a version of herself that had once believed endurance would become love if she held it long enough. They separated within a month. There was no clean, dramatic exit. Maris took a temporary apartment above Vera's bakery, a narrow place with slanted floors, old radiators, and windows that smelled faintly of sugar in the mornings because the oven started before sunrise. She packed clothes, work files, the cardboard box, and a few kitchen things. She left the dining table. She left most of the wedding gifts. She left the framed vineyard photo where Brennan had called her his anchor. On the day she moved, Brennan stood in the living room, holding a roll of packing tape, useless in the middle of tasks he did not know how to anticipate. "I can help," he said. Maris looked at the half-filled box at his feet. It held 3 books, a lamp without its cord, and 2 mugs wrapped so loosely they would probably break. "I know," she said, and kept packing. Some people said she had destroyed him. Others sent private messages saying they wished they had her courage. Both responses felt wrong. Courage sounded too clean. Destruction gave her too much power. What happened was messier. Brennan lost the promotion, then the role, then some friends who had liked him better when liking him cost nothing. Dorian kept his job but not his innocence. Helena stopped calling. Jonas sent occasional texts, never asking her to manage his brother's feelings. Vera left bread outside Maris's apartment door without knocking. Amara brought her back part-time first, then more gradually, teaching her through policy what Maris had never learned through love. Being excellent did not require being endlessly available. 1 year later, Maris worked as an independent events consultant with fewer clients and less money, but also fewer midnight emergencies that were not hers. She still felt the pull sometimes. A vendor would call in a panic, and she would feel her body preparing to overfunction. A client would say, "You are the only one who can fix this," and the old warmth would flicker, the drug of being necessary. She learned to pause before answering. She learned that not every falling glass needed her hand beneath it. She learned badly and unevenly that letting something break was not always cruelty. Sometimes it was the only way to prove who had been throwing things. Brennan emailed in the fall, not a long email, not a plea. He wrote that he had begun therapy because Kellen required it as part of the severance negotiation, then continued after the requirement ended. He wrote that he had apologized to Dorian without asking to be forgiven. He wrote that he was beginning to understand that an apology spoken after someone else had paid. The price was not accountability, only grief arriving late. He wrote, "I think I loved you as the person who kept me from seeing myself. I am sorry I called that love, before I understood what it cost you." Maris read the email twice in the small apartment above the bakery, while rain gathered on the window ledge. She did not cry immediately. That surprised her. Instead, she closed the laptop, sat very still, and listened to Vera's mixers humming downstairs through the floorboards. The apology was better than the old ones, more specific, less hungry. It did not ask her to soothe him, that mattered. It also changed almost nothing. There are truths that arrive too late to repair what their absence destroyed. That evening, while sorting through a final box from the old house, Maris found the navy sports coat Brennan had worn the night he drank too much at Jonas's birthday. She had taken it to the cleaner twice back then. The wine stain on the cuff had faded but never fully disappeared. A faint shadow remained, brownish red near the seam, visible only if the fabric caught the light. For years, she had hated that stain because it represented failure. Hers, somehow. She had not cleaned well enough. She had not erased the evidence completely enough. Now she held the coat by the shoulders and felt nothing dramatic, no triumph, no rage, just recognition. She folded it carefully, placed it in a return bag with Brennan's name written on a piece of masking tape, and left the stain exactly as it was. Outside, Asheville evening settled blue over the street. Downstairs, Vera turned off the bakery lights one by one. Maris stood in the apartment with the bag at her feet and the cardboard box of evidence on the shelf behind her. She no longer needed to open it every week, but she did not throw it away. Not yet, maybe not ever. Some people believed healing meant clearing out all proof of damage. Maris had learned that proof could be a boundary when memory became too generous. The stain stayed on the cuff, the emails stayed in the box, the old captions stayed online somewhere, calling her anchor, compass, calm. People could believe what they wanted about the marriage, about loyalty, about whether a wife should have handled things differently. Maris had handled things differently for years. She had handled them gently, privately, elegantly, at cost to herself. She had handled them until handling became another word for disappearing. Now, for the first time in her adult life, she let a mark remain where it belonged. Not because it healed her, it did not. Not because it ruined Brennan, he would live, he might even become better. But because the stain was real, and she was done turning reality into fabric someone else could wear cleanly. The apartment above the bakery was not a victory. It was drafty in winter, too warm in summer, and loud before dawn when Vera's delivery driver unloaded flour beneath the window. Some mornings Maris woke with the old reflex to check her phone for Brennan's emergencies, then remembered there would be none she was required to answer. At first that silence did not feel peaceful. It felt like withdrawal. Her hands wanted tasks. Her mind searched for problems to solve. She almost called Helena twice, not because she missed being scolded, but because the role of daughter-in-law had left a shape in her day. She almost replied to Brennan's email with comfort. She typed, "I am glad you are getting help," then deleted it because even kindness could become a rope if she handed it to him too soon. She learned to let hours pass without becoming useful. It was harder than leaving. Usefulness had been her religion, her disguise, her proof of goodness. Without it, she had to meet herself unadorned. A woman who was tired, angry, capable, lonely, sometimes petty, sometimes generous, not always graceful, not always strong, no longer willing to be praised into silence. One Saturday, Vera came upstairs carrying 2 coffees and found Maris sitting on the floor beside the cardboard box. The papers were not spread out this time. The box was closed. Maris's hand rested on the lid. Vera sat beside her without asking permission. After a while, Maris said, "I used to think if someone needed me badly enough, it meant they loved me deeply." Vera looked at the window, where rain made the glass look old. "Sometimes people need a ladder," she said. "That does not mean they love the ladder." Maris gave a small laugh, painful and true. "I was a very good ladder." Vera leaned her head briefly against Maris's shoulder. "You are also a person." The sentence sounded simple, it was not. Months later, at a small event for a local arts nonprofit, a caterer delivered the wrong dessert, and everyone turned instinctively toward Maris. She felt the old current rush through her body, bright and dangerous, fix it, save it, become necessary. Instead, she asked the caterer what solution they proposed. The young woman blinked, panicked, then made 3 calls and found a replacement. The event survived. The guests ate late, no one died. Maris stood near the back of the room, watching people continue laughing after an imperfection had been allowed to exist. She thought of the champagne glass breaking behind the velvet curtain a year earlier. How quickly everyone had pretended not to hear it. How much of her life had been spent making broken glass disappear before anyone cut themselves on the truth. Now, when something broke, she listened longer. She waited to see who bent down. She did not always step forward first, and if no one did, sometimes she let the pieces remain visible on the floor, glittering under the light, dangerous only to those who insisted on walking through the room as if nothing had happened.